the conduct and outcomes of conflicts increasingly depend on information and communications, and propaganda has to a large extent played a key role in shaping attitudes, emotions, perceptions during periods of conflict. The digital age adding to that, bringing its own significant range of influence to this. Case in point, if we just look back just a little bit, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now the horrific scenes that we're seeing coming out of the Middle East, the public, of course, being bombarded with information. What is truth and what is a fake? On the agenda this afternoon, we speak now to William Bird, who is the director at Media Monitoring Africa, as well as Thembisa Fakude, as a senior research fellow and Africa-Asia dialogue on these issues. To you both, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I want to start with you, Mr. Bird. Let's start with the conflict that we're now seeing in the Middle East. There seems to be a lot of disinformation, in particular flooding social media to drive a particular narrative. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Hi, good afternoon. There's no doubt, I think that's given the complex nature of it, given the brutality, and given the very different interests and vested interests and powers around this, there's a absolute deluge of mis and disinformation. We're seeing sources that we haven't heard of before across all of our social media platforms. They're gaming the algorithms, and what that means in reality is that any normal person who goes onto their feed will be exposed to content, and most of it will be shocking and horrific. And the default is don't believe anything that you see on social media unless you know it's from an actual credible news entity. And even then you should go and double check that it is really coming from that news entity. We've seen in South Africa alone examples where images of the Israeli flag were allegedly shone onto the Ponte Tower. And that isn't true. And yet there's a video confirming it, there are pictures of it. So unless you actually know the news entity that's coming, and what this does highlight is why news media, why public broadcasters like the SABC are so absolutely critical as we hit this era where it's increasingly difficult to determine what's real and what isn't.
And I want to come exactly to that point, Mr. Bird. I'll come to you very shortly, Mr. Fakude. When you talk about, there's a lot of reliance, on news media to try and discern what is fact and what is just fiction. There are media houses that have already been criticized, some around the world, where news media, would be the ones to safeguard against falling into the trap of being used to spread certain propaganda. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, that is a real problem. I think part of it is that, different media speak to different audiences. So you will know that certain media will take a pro-Israeli side, other media may take a pro-Palestinian side, or pro-Hamas side even, and it's up to the user and the audience to determine where they want to see this particular conflict in terms of how and where their own ideological allegiances lie. When, however, you're a public broadcaster, as the SABC is, for example, the SABC can't afford to take sides. It has to have clear editorial positions that say conflict, war is bad, loss of life, especially through acts where civilians are targeted, for example, need to be highlighted, they need to be critiqued. And that's what the SABC needs to do. It makes it incredibly hard for them because they make one small error, they use one incorrect word or phrase, and you can bet that people from both sides will jump onto it.
Mr. Fakude, thank you very much for joining us as well. Talk to us about, how dangerous this is, not specifically with what we're seeing in terms of the spread of disinformation, particularly on social media, but what we're seeing in the Middle East now, but the dangers of the spread of disinformation, particularly when we see such conflict raging.
Well, I think we need to prepare ourselves and understand that the world is moving and communication, modes of communication are changing, including the technology that is involved in communication. So I don't think we should be afraid, but this is the new reality. I think what we need to do as communicators and as journalists is to prepare ourselves, particularly with the intro or the entrant of the AI into our business. We need to prepare ourselves on how we go about dealing with these issues, because as much as it was funny when the Trump administration talked about different truths, now we see the reality of different truths. And people are exposed to different truths because there's just a mirage of media platforms and institutions through which people are consuming information. So this is the new reality, and I think we need to prepare ourselves on how we're going to go, not necessarily to spend more time countering what is seen as fake news, because to others, fake news has become the reality. So how do we prepare ourselves for this new reality and continue doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is informing our publics as clear and as truthful as we should be.
The spread of propaganda or, of course, disinformation, of course, the sole purpose would be to shape perception, to the audience. But how does the public empower themselves to discern or to even identify misinformation, whether it's on mainstream or social media? Can you even do that where in a situation like this, whether it's an election, whether it's conflict that is raging somewhere in the world, there are even bots that are set up to spread this kind of information? Where does this leave the public and how they discern between what's real and what is not? Mr. Fakude.
Well, that horse is long bolted. That horse is long bolted. I don't think we are going to be able to rein in people into convincing them what's credible or not credible, and which brands are credible and which brands are not credible. I think what we need to do is there's a need for general education, and that's not the role of the media or journalists to educate the public about the truth, misconceptions, and propaganda. Our job is to continue telling the stories the way we tell them. But the proliferation of media organization or news media organization will continue, and each and every one of them will have its own agenda. Now, where that responsibility lies in terms of educating the audiences and making them aware of the trappings of possible propaganda and misinformation, I'm not quite sure where that lies at the moment, but I don't think it's the responsibility of the media, because you will be entering a different terrain of trying to fight competition, and this is likely, of course, to expose competition to undue criticism by those who seek to suppress them. So it's a very complicated situation, and I think the horse has bolted in terms of us reining in our audiences, in terms of educating them what's fake and what's not fake.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Bird? The horse is long bolted. You often criticize us where necessary, as the SABC and any other media, for example, but has that horse bolted in terms of trying to educate, our communities on how to consume, news and what is being put out there, depending, of course, on whether it's fake or true?
So look, I agree with Mr. Fakude certainly about the fact that disinformation is exploding with the developments around AI. It's going to become increasingly difficult to determine what's real and what's rubbish. But I don't agree with the fact that we then should give up on that. There are objective realities. People do lose their lives. Events do happen. Elections do happen. We can't say because various parties want to deny that they're there or deny that that they just become anything that you want them to be. That's because the moment you accept that position, it accepts that your democracy doesn't necessarily function or serve a critical purpose. So I think that there are two key elements to this. The one is that it is important to highlight the difference between what credible media, like the public broadcaster, and others who subscribe to, ethical principles and standards. We know that if the SABC puts out something, for example, we can challenge it. We can say, well, where did you get that from? Source did you get that from that? And if they're wrong, they have to make amends for that, right? That's not what happens on digital media. Part of the distinction between journalists and anyone who just puts out content is precisely that journalists have to verify. They have to take steps to verify facts. They have to bring their audiences in and help them understand how they construct and validate their information. So I think what's going to change significantly over the next couple of years is how journalism has to validate and bring its audiences to see how they come to the view that they do on something. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to necessarily change everyone's mind, but it is important that if we're to have functioning democracy, that you can say elections will take place on this date, the process will be free, fair and credible, and here's the steps that we know various bodies take to do that, and the media need to be able to report on that and expose wrongdoing as and when it occurs.
Yeah. Mr. Fakude, the role of the owners of these social media networks, for example, where we are seeing an influx of the spread of this disinformation. Some would say, for example, Elon Musk's X, appears to have had the worst outbreak of some of, this fake news that's being spread. What is the responsibility of these, the owners of these social media platforms to rein some of this in, if at all they can?
Well, the first and the biggest question is it our responsibility as journalists to educate audiences about the trappings of fake propaganda and, what's truthful? I don't think so. I think our responsibility is very clear. Our responsibility is to report news. The responsibility of influencing and changing consumer behavior in this regard, how our audiences consume news, that's not the responsibility of journalism. Journalists must make sure that they continue to be truthful, objective, and report what's happening on the ground. And the best you can do that is by strengthening your brand, making sure that your brand becomes a go-to platform in terms of consumption of news. But with the proliferation of various organizations around the world, it's going to be extremely difficult to begin to change the attitude of brand loyalty, number one. For example, you go to the United States and you just do your quick research on the proliferation in terms of what's fake and what's not fake. It's shocking. So I think we need to concentrate on the task on hand, and the task on hand is continue telling the stories as are supposed to be told, to be truthful and objective, and ensuring that we inform our audiences as they're supposed to be informed. But I don't think it's our responsibility to go and change, influence the consumer behavior, in this instance, how audiences consume or prefer to consume their news.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your time as always here on the SABC News Channel.